Hello and welcome to another episode of the SEO Unplugged podcast. I'm your host, Itamar Blauer. Today, I'm joined with Gerry White, who's an SEO consultant based out of somewhere near Gatwick Airport. Gerry, how are you?
Hey, yeah, good. Yeah. About 10 miles from Gatwick Airport, between Gatwick and London. So it's almost the perfect location.
Amazing, which is also helpful for people to know in case you fly into London, because Gatwick really isn't in London. And also, if you arrive at night, you're probably not going to get any trains to go home. So if that does happen to you on the odd chance, give Gerry a shout, is all I would say. Or don't, but yeah, sure. Alrighty, let's segue on to the topic for today. So we're going to be talking about local SEO within the sort of realm of AI and how AI platforms interact when it comes to localized searches. And of course, we know that within LLMs or parts of the, I guess, contemporary nature of AI platforms is to be able to provide really strong personalized contextual answers. So, Gerry, from what you sort of know around local SEO or local search in particular when it comes to AI platforms, what's sort of your initial take and where are we at this moment in time?
So as everybody knows, AI, LLMs, or AEO, whatever you want to call it, is changing constantly. And one of the things that I would say is that what I'm saying today is probably slightly incorrect tomorrow, and in a week's time, it might be even more incorrect. So it's always worth kind of understanding that everything's changing. And one of the things I would say at the moment is I feel like most of my friends have started switching over to using Gemini a lot more than like ChatGPT, for instance. And a lot of the reason for this is because Gemini just seems to be able to integrate better with what they're doing and how they're working and things like that. So, for local SEO, suddenly we're almost going back to what works on Google actually works on LLMs, as long as you're, answer engine optimization if you're using Gemini. What is interesting is that's kind of been a lot of the research that I've been doing as to why some of the localization stuff that I've been doing, which includes international as much as it kind of includes like down the road type stuff, it's very, very unpredictable. A good example of that is that I will kind of do a search in one country and it will be bringing content in from a completely unrelated country just because of the way in which it kind of goes, this is the best answer for it. Even though there is a localized version, we've got hreflang implemented, we've got everything else like that implemented. And the reason behind that is that a lot of the time these LLMs, they kind of go, okay, this all text is the same. This is the answer it's producing. This is the reference for it. And it consolidates it all. It doesn't have 10 different localized copies if 10 different localized copies are basically the same content. This is particular for blogs and similar things. So, it's suddenly international, local, it all overlaps, particularly in this particular topic. One of the core things is like using schema, for instance, but schema seems to be unpredictably reliable in that I will kind of say, yep, schema works really, really effectively. LLMs use it, everything's fine, but then it will kind of it'll kind of make a mistake due to something misinterpretation somewhere. So it's worth knowing that nothing is bulletproof at the moment. One of the things that I have been doing is kind of putting extra content onto some of the pages. So for instance, if you've got an office in Paris, you can say something like, it's close to the Eiffel Tower. And for that seems to help it to kind of understand localization as much as the schema does, which is a very strange situation.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting sort of tip. And I guess that sort of comes down to entities and the understanding that, AI platforms have, or whether it's sort of LLMs utilizing RAG just to sort of get more up-to-date type of information based on its original training data, which of course does get updated. But again, we don't really know the frequency of when that happens or actually what gets added in. So that's still sort of the black box that we have no idea about. But of course, being able to give the sort of contextual elements of where things are based in proximity to one another. So, Eiffel Tower is in Paris, or to be able to, I guess, give those pointers. So something that I've been looking at lately with loads of different AI platforms is typing in searches that would generally on a Google search generate some kind of map pack, and then trying to replicate that across different platforms to see which ones will actually give some kind of map interface, or at least pull in certain types of ones. The only ones that I've seen it do that consistently, and I'll put Gemini aside because, of course, that's a Google product and they will utilize Google products within that. But the ones that I found use map packs more prominently would be ChatGPT, and in some cases Perplexity. Now, the ChatGPT one is primarily seemingly just from a Google Maps API call, or how it sort of pulls that in. With Perplexity, it's a bit different. It seems to be utilizing some kind of, I don't know if it's a third party or its own curated version of like different data points that it pulls in. So it'll aggregate certain reviews from different platforms. It'll show you where the different locations are. But then when you click on directions, it will still feed into the Google Maps business location for that on Perplexity. Now, the reason why I'm sort of bringing this up, and because what you mentioned before of, things can change so fast, where next week people listening to this might end up seeing very different types of results. But at the time that we're recording this, obviously fresh into the new year in 2026, this is what's happening at the moment. And so what I've also noticed from the ChatGPT perspective is that the map packs tend to show up when you actually specify a location within your prompt. Because when you don't, and it's sort of arbitrarily just displayed in a prompt, it will usually just sort of give generalizations. And sometimes that may not be relevant to where you are located, which I assume these platforms do have the ability to sort of know where you are. So I do wonder, as part of the personalization approach in their platforms, why that doesn't usually show up. So have you sort of found any consistencies or inconsistencies around local types of prompt usage within different platforms?
Yeah, I mean, the statistic that at some point Google basically said 50% of their searches had a local element. I'm trying to pick an example, but basically I was looking for photocopier repair or something, and it basically went, these are the local places near you that does photocopier repair. What I'm getting at is that basically Google infers a huge amount of localized knowledge, and I'm assuming that LLMs will be doing this more and more increasingly so, but the knowledge it has about your location depends on whether or not you're on an app, if you're on a desktop, if you're on various things, and if it's got access to this information. If it's only looking at your location for an IP address, that's surprisingly inaccurate. A lot of the time, if it says, what's your location, the IP address that will kind of come back will give you within probably 20, 30, 40 miles, which for local information isn't always that good. The other thing it will do is it will kind of take information that it knows about you. We've all played the game where we've kind of said, hey, ChatGPT, or hey, Google, or whatever it is, based on, what you know about me, what do you know about me? My phone's started to try and do stuff now because I said the wrong prompt. But basically, it'll start to kind of try and know information about you. And at that point, it'll start to kind of go, okay, you live near Gatwick Airport, therefore these are the local results. Even though right now, for instance, I'm sat in Chelmsford, it doesn't know that I'm in Chelmsford unless it's got some additional information to kind of add into that. So localization on them is based on previous history as much as it's based on like the IP address and other similar information. So yeah, I mean, one of the things I stupidly did was I set up some kind of data into Gemini, which said, a little bit about me, including the fact I live in Gatwick. And now every time I put something in, it will reference that bit of information. I need to delete it out of it because it's getting annoying. But it was just to kind of like train it on how I want interactions to happen. So yeah, there is a lot of information there. But the local side of it, again, it's really unpredictable, but most of them are hooking into the Google GBP API, which is an API which they can all use quite cheaply or effectively to basically retrieve local information about things. One of the things that I had noticed, and I've got a favorite example for this one, is that they're using the review data a lot. So I'm just going to talk about Gemini again. I asked Gemini to kind of recommend a bar in York, which served a Negroni on a Saturday evening. And it constantly recommended a bar based on the reviews that it was in. That said, oh, the reviews mention how good the Negroni is. It says this, it says that. It's got a great vibe. It's exactly what you're looking for. It had been closed for 2 years. And despite Gemini hooking into the GBP API and getting the reviews data out of it, it was making this mistake repeatedly. And I say repeatedly because I said, nope, it's closed. And it says, oh, my mistake. Yes, it's been closed for 18 months. Brilliant. Okay. And I'd sort of ask it again like a while later, because I might modify the query slightly, saying, hey, I want a place that's warm because York is always cold. And it was like, yes, this bar is known for being warm, and it's underground. It's got a venue that's, it's like, is it still closed? Yes, it's still closed. It's amazing how stupid some of these LLMs are at the moment. And although they're insanely clever for a lot of information, they seem to be based on information that's kind of a snapshot at a certain time. Working in SEO, we know full well that, we'll read through the recommendations that it's kind of spitting out, and we'll be like, that's 2 years out of date. That's so out of date. It's coming from Reddit information that's written about information previously. So yeah, the local information is particularly frequently out of date.
Yeah, and I think you've touched upon two sort of aspects there. The first one is around the concept of the user having to train the model before it's able to get as good a result as it probably should get. And when you think about it from your average Joe, who won't really understand how AI platforms or LLMs work, they won't know. They may not even know that you can customize your experience or add context and these sorts of things. So it makes you wonder, for the average person who is going to make a localized search, are we then saying that the results are going to be worse until you're able to feed it more information, and sort of you as the user have to do that, take that step? Because from a Google search perspective, you don't, because it will sort of know where you are, and it should be able to sort of give you or at least with some kind of fairly close proximity to you, these types of local results. Whereas it seems like within LLMs, they're not going to do so until they know the information. So the example you gave with Gemini is like, okay, you gave it the information of where you're based, but also the flip side is it's always going to use that as the default. So if you go somewhere else and you still log in, at what point is it going to change to where it knows where you are, so that you don't have to keep telling it, oh, by the way, I'm on holiday. Oh, by the way, I'm in this place now. Because I think that from a user experience perspective is a lot worse, right? So that's the sort of first part of that. But then the second part of mentioning these bars were closed and outdated Reddit information, it seems like still a lot of the answers that are being given are based on consensus. So even if the sort of real time, if today a place might be closed, but if generally the consensus is X, or that they do have the best whatever, it's still going to likely reference that. Obviously, when from a user perspective, again, it's still not good because the place is closed and you can't do anything about that, and you have to continue with another prompt or another type of search. So, at what point do you think this is going to change, or how likely is it that these sort of flaws can be improved? Because at the moment, they're quite significant, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, if you're using the app, it's going to be able to get a huge amount of information about you. And as you say, basically, the more you're using it, the better they'll be. I know full well that Gemini and ChatGPT particularly has got a very interesting view of me and who I am and what I do. Downside is that you and I both work on probably handbag websites and medical health websites and all sorts of other stuff. So, if we're not careful, we're training it on what we're actually looking at from the client point of view rather than what we're looking at personally. But normal human beings, they're constantly sort of training it on, the information that really does help to build up that picture. And I think one of the things that we all know is that if I do a search and you do a search on ChatGPT, I say search, but if we enter a prompt on ChatGPT, 5 of us will get quite different things based on exactly how we've interacted with it. Even minor interactions will have a big difference into it. In terms of the future of it, I think that things are going to improve rapidly. At the moment, there are deals being made constantly between like Apple is just buying into Gemini, Microsoft and ChatGPT deals. So all of the kind of information that feeds into Bing, that feeds into all of these different APIs, is going to be resurfaced, reused, and taken out to kind of enhance these products considerably. So I think right now we're in that area where they're kind of trying to basically race ahead to make it as good as possible. They're making mistakes. We've seen the 5-legged horses, the 4-legged snakes, and various things where AI has made some strange mistakes because the training data it's got has been misinterpreted. But as we move on, that'll only get better. Internationalization is another thing at the moment. I mean, one of the strange things is that, if you write an article about a dog in French, English, Spanish, German, LLMs seem to translate it all into a single kind of universal language. It seems to be English at the moment, but at some point it might even be a machine learning language type thing, because one of the interesting things is the fact that there was a case where two LLMs talking to each other sort of broke down into their own unique language to speed it up. The point is that at the moment, the way in which all information is consumed is kind of really rapid and localized in such a way that, there is mistakes being made. It is going to be interesting that, if say five different language versions of a document are translated into English, we all know that, if you translate them back again, often meaning and interpretation can change. So what I'm getting at is, right now, we're still in this incredibly early stage where LLMs and answer engines and all of these tools are scrabbling to kind of make them as good as possible. They're in the last 6 months, they've gone from being, they're okay, to, wow, this is actually incredibly useful. And I will use these time and time again to kind of plan out trips, to do anything and everything. And if users are doing the same thing and it's getting better and better for them, then as use grows, as the utilization grows, the training data improves, and they'll get better and better and better. So yeah, they're pretty terrible at some really basic stuff right now. One weird example, dates in English and dates in American are written differently, and often an LLM will kind of get the wrong date for an event or something, just based on the fact if it's reading it without any other information. So, if it's written longhand with December, it's great. But if it's like I'm trying to give an example, 311 or 11.3, it can misinterpret which one's which. So point is that we're still in the stage where everything is being learned by LLMs, and we are the early adopters. We're the test audience at the moment. We're the guys kind of going, this is terrible because of this. And the developers are kind of going, okay, it's terrible because of that, so we'll fix that. And they're constantly iterating. I mean, we're on, what version of ChatGPT are we on now?
It's like 5.2 at the moment.
Yeah. But you remember, like, when 4 came out, it was a jump ahead of 3. It was like one of those, wow, this is better. It stopped hallucinating as much. It started to actually be far more functional and usable as a professional rather than as a toy.
Well, it might start moving like the iPhones in terms of the versions, right? Eventually, because again, I think this is what to kind of follow on from what you're saying is, a lot of people don't realize how much more there is still that's possible out there with this technology, that we've only sort of really just begun in terms of the acceleration part of it, maybe, but it's only going to get faster. And I think within different platforms and different types of interfaces, whether that's on ChatGPT, who are introducing ads, for example, and how that may affect localized types of searches, but also to the point you made about how Gemini's been improving lately, whereas before, for many types of, and I've also heard actually some friends who have also mentioned that Gemini now from like 2026, it's improved a lot, like significantly. But then it also makes you wonder, it's like, okay, am I going to need to be jumping around between different types of platforms depending on what my need is? So for example, if it's to utilize local searches, maybe for right now, I'll avoid Claude and I'll avoid Copilot because they're not great at actually giving localized types of results or map packs and things like that, and opt for something like ChatGPT or Perplexity, right? So, and this is, I guess, the sort of weird and wonderful landscape that we're in, where things are accelerating, but also there's testing that's happening all the time. So to the point that you mentioned, something that we may have said in this episode may no longer be relevant in a month's time, in a year's time. So it really is the sort of, we've kind of gotten to the evolution of it depends on a whole nother sphere, because actually we have no idea in terms of how far these things will go, or how far the technology advances, and exactly where it will be. But for the time being, at least from what we've discussed today, local is improving, and there are sort of different bits that can feed into how users can get better experiences from local searches within AI, and how these AI platforms actually understand localization and what people want. And I think that quite nicely wraps it up, Gerry, unless there was sort of any other little final tips that you had.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. One of the things I would say is that all of the different LLMs that we use them for different things. I personally use Claude for writing code, for writing documents, for creating and assessing stuff. So basically, if I've written a client report, I'll use Claude to help me just kind of go and rewrite elements of it. For dodgy image creation, so if I, for instance, want to put a photograph of you with armbands on, for instance, weird thing, but I did that to a friend recently, that's a grok task. If I want local kind of information that's up to date and uses map information and Google API, I use Gemini. ChatGPT is something I use for a lot of kind of quick analysis stuff. So I do use the different ones for different purposes at the moment. I had Perplexity Pro for a year, but now I think I'm probably going to be getting Gemini Pro for the next year, just because I think that they're all different and they're all serving different purposes, but Gemini seems to be the one that I'm finding the most useful. But I think for users, what we'll see is that they will basically decide on one, and it will take a lot for them to shift over to a different one, because that's the way in which most of our users kind of end up working. So yeah, we're going to be slightly more flexible about what we do because we're nerds, but general users, I think they're going to be sticking with Gemini, unfortunately, which means Google's going to win, which is frustrating as hell because, we really want the end of Google dominance.
Well, we will see what happens. But to wrap it up, Gerry, where can people find you in case they get into Gatwick later? I'm joking. Where can people find you if they want to ask any questions or just reach out?
I'm Dergal everywhere. Basically, Dergal, which is on the screen now, DERGAL. Dergal.co.uk is my website. If you search for me on Twitter, if you search for me on LinkedIn, if you search for me on Blue Sky, I'm pretty much everywhere with the same handle. I should rank well for Gerry White. I don't rank as well for SEO consultant as I'd like to, but if you search for UK sexiest SEO consultant, I rank number 2 at the moment, and I have no idea why.
Alrighty, so 2026 resolutions, Gerry, get you to that number 1 spot. And so thank you very much, Gerry, for your time today and the conversation, and to everybody listening at home as well. And as always, we will see you in the next episode.